Hello, party people, and welcome to office hours. I was going to make myself a drink, and then one thing led to another. I am out of tonic water. I usually drink gin and tonics, and I was like, all right, well, it's time to go through the collection and kind of figure out what it is that we're going to put together here. So I still went with something really simple. I just went with a highball and called it a day. As I record this, it is a beautiful Saturday afternoon in Las Vegas. Gorgeous weather outside. But I've done so many office hours outside, I was like, oh, I should probably do one inside every now and then. And because people inevitably ask, no, that is not Epstein over there on the wall. That's a portrait of Anthony Bourdain by Cassie Ott. I have another portrait of hers of Bourdain in my office. He's the one giving you the finger when we're watching from in there. So let's go through your top voted questions from PollGab. If it's your first time watching, you can hit the link in the description below to see how you can ask me a question. Top voted question is from JRL, who says, do you have any advice about communicating effectively in a fully remote workplace where all discussion is centered around a messaging platform like Slack or Teams? The company I work for is turned into a busy chat room and important messages are missed. Yep, it's up to you to track what follow-up you need from other people. And this is true whether it's email, whether your team uses phone calls, group messages, anything like that. It is up to you to have some kind of system to track what people owe you. I love help desk ticketing systems for this. If your company has a help desk ticketing system, create tickets and assign them to people. I need this from you. That's one certainly way to do it. It's kind of a passive-aggressive way to do it. Another way that I like to do it is I personally use Gmail for all my client interactions. So I'll just send an email and BCC myself, have a rule that goes automatically into a folder, and then whenever I get the tasks taken care of from that client, I can delete the emails out of that folder. But trust me, it doesn't matter what tool you use, this is going to be something that you're going to have to master for the rest of your life. Next up, Caregiver asks, what is the benefit of just using Constant Care instead of running SP Blitz once a week and emailing my team with the results? Great question. SQL Constant Care digs into more than just what's covered in SP Blitz. It also does things like index recommendations, for example, that SP Blitz doesn't do. And one of the things that I find really interesting from clients is that they've told me that they like having the managers copied on the info from SQL Constant Care. SQL Constant Care prioritizes the most urgent stuff that you have to do. SP Blitz also gives you all kinds of background information, but SQL Constant Care is focused on what are the tasks that you should knock out to keep your server healthy. Blitz can be an overwhelming thing for managers because there's just so much results that come out of there, whereas SQL Constant Care is like, look, dummy, you're not taking care of this. And we even follow up with you. We even have emails that go out and go, hey, talk to me about why you're not doing blank. And I've heard from client managers that they love being able to say, all right, team, no, seriously, why aren't we doing blank? Because the manager can click on the URL in the email too and see what our recommendations are and why they're that way. So a lot more around accountability there and focusing you on the most important stuff first. Next up, Marian says, hi Brent, what advice do you have for a SQL developer to improve when their job feels routine and too comfortable? Oh, this is an easy one. Teach. If your job feels too routine and comfortable, that's because you're good at what you do. Now you need to teach other people what you do. Whether it's lunch and learns inside your organization, whether it's writing blog posts or YouTube presentations, whether it's giving back at your local user group or trying to present at conferences, teaching other people will force you to sharpen your knives. It will open up new ways that you didn't know things that you thought you did. This happens to me all the time. This is one of the reasons I love working on live streams, like working with the garage door open, is people get to be exposed to what I don't know and what I get surprised by as I'm writing blog posts or YouTube videos or whatever. Teaching other people will liven your job up big time. Steve says, hi, Brent. Any plans for a run of merchandise? I'd love a t-shirt that says, what's the problem you're trying to solve? No, we used to actually sell merch. We sold merch like coffee cups and stickers and stuff. And international taxes and shipping was a giant pain in the rear. So these days, that's why I sell my training classes through a hosting partner that manages all the tax for us. We could theoretically do the same thing with merch, but it tends to be pretty expensive. So it's just not something. I'd have no problem with somebody building their own merch and like putting it on themselves. I would kind of have a problem with people selling merch with my stuff, but yeah, by all means, go ahead. Planetscale asks, have you ever thought about moving SQL Constant Care to Aurora Optimized Reads? No, because reads aren't our bottleneck, writes are. We ingest. If I remember right, it's been a little while since I looked, about 750 gigabytes of data per month. Not that that's a terribly big number. I mean, I have clients who do much larger than that, but the reading of that data is not our big problem. The ingesting of it and keeping our bills as low as possible is the one that's more important there. Dopinder says, do you have any class modules on generating synthetic data for SQL Server lower environments? No, not at all. And if I just don't have any expertise on it, it's not something that clients have ever asked me to do. I'd say it's just like a lot of other things in life. If you want to do it quickly and easily, go buy a third-party product. There are a ton out there that Redgate has a test data generator, for example. If you don't want it quick and easy, then it's going to be left up to you to roll things at your own devices. But that's why, there you go. Because my time is valuable, I'd be just like, look, if you want to do that task, go buy Redgate test data generator, whatever it is that they call it. It's going to be way cheaper than paying me for my time to write something like that. Just go buy it off the shelf. Mr. SqlSeeks asks, when you encounter a client experiencing database corruption, what tends to be the most common cause of that corruption? So if you go to brentozar.com/go/corrupt, you'll see I have a blog post that tells you exactly what to do in the event that corruption strikes. That's actually where I point my clients. The instant that they have a corruption issue, I say go, because I can't drop everything, right? I'm usually booked 2 to 3 weeks out in advance. So I say just go to brentozar.com/go/corrupt, follow that checklist, and I tell you exactly what I would do in your shoes. And I also explain to clients in there why it doesn't make sense to hire me for that, because I can't usually drop anything and I can't predict how long it's going to take to do root cause analysis. That gets really expensive. It's not like you can just say, hey, Brent, here's a suitcase full of money. Work with me as long as you can in order to get to root cause analysis. I'm usually booked 2 to 3 weeks out, and then after that, I have stuff booked already out. I have stuff booked out going through November, like various pockets worth of time. So on something like corruption, which could take an unlimited amount of time or could be done in an hour, it really just doesn't make sense to hire a consultant for that. And I explain how you call Microsoft and open a support ticket for that kind of thing. Now, all that to say why I don't have a most common cause list, because I don't deal with it that often. But I can tell you from like 10 years ago, when I was actually doing that myself and managing people's database servers, the far and away the biggest cause was filter drivers. People would install filter drivers to do all kinds of crazy stuff, and it would end up trashing their database. And Microsoft even has knowledge base articles about some of those filter drivers. Next up, DamastaG says, hi Brent, when I'm troubleshooting code that does things based on time, like only run this part if it's a Sunday, is there a way to spoof your session date and time so it will run the way you need it to? This was such a good question that I posed it to a couple of friends of mine, Aaron Bertrand and Andy Mallon. We all happen to be sitting around in Canada, and I was like, hey, let me ask you something, because it's a really neat question. I have my answer, but I want to hear what your answers are. Andy said he would use session context. He would say, set a session for the DBA or developer who wants to control the daytime. Set something in your session context, because that's not something that users would usually know how to do. And then have in your code, if the session context says this, then go down this branch of code. Andy had another good one. Andy said, the other thing that I would do is at the very top of the code, declare the date time that you're going to work with, and have a date time parameter for the stored procedure or code as well. So that if that date time is passed in, then the app is going to use that date time as if it was the real date time. Otherwise, it uses the value that was set right at the beginning of that stored procedure. I was like, I love that. That's fantastic. That also empowers other people to do debugging, or it also empowers them to rerun a failed job. Like if the Sunday 5 p.m. jobs failed and you wanted to let somebody go back and rerun it again, you could do that by just passing in the date time of Sunday at 5 p.m. Aaron had another one, and I can't remember what Aaron's answer was. It's going to kill me now that I don't. I think he had a debug switch, like that would say run monthly or something like that, but it was also a good idea. Now I'm going to kick myself for not remembering that piece. That's a shame. So let's see. Oh, I should say, what was my answer? My answer would be that everything that you would do in the stored proc that would be dramatically different, like run the month-end stuff, run the Wednesday stuff, those should be separate child stored procedures that you go call based on whatever the date time is in the parent stored procedure. The parent one would make the decisions to go do things, then it would call the child stored procedures, which is also good advice just in terms of things like parameter sniffing. Next up, my friend says, I've been managing databases for a long time, and now I have a crazy notion that I might like to move towards managing a technical team instead. I dipped my toe in a little and I was okay with it. Any training that you would recommend for making the leap? I just posted in my weekly links, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, I just posted a rundown of here's a bunch of career advice, including things that you would think of if you were going to become a data lead or like a data technical lead. I don't remember what they were off the top of my head, but if you subscribe to my weekly newsletters, you can go back and see the archives, and then that way you could go back a few weeks and see what those were. Also, it's just a plug that you should subscribe to my totally free weekly links. If you go to brentozar.com/subscribe, totally for free, every week on Monday morning, I send out my favorite links from the past week. Sometimes they go back years. Sometimes I cherry pick a group of links that relate to a specific topic. Like last week's was career training, like what you should consider when you're going to invest in your career for training. Not to sell my own courses, but like decisions that you should make. And so it's a great way to see the kinds of things that I've been reading and things that I bookmarked and found useful for myself. Next up, we have Devesh says, future impact on DBA jobs due to the introduction of agentic AI. More and more companies will, so hold on, I disagree with something that you've got inside there. You said more and more companies will introduce database agents as well. I think you're assuming a lot. You're taking a technology that is in its infancy and you're assuming that it's going to be widespread quickly, and you're assuming that it's going to work well. As someone who uses AI on a daily basis, I disagree. I do not think that agents are anywhere near production quality ready to the point where they influence DBA jobs. Where AI agents in their limited functionality today start to make sense is when someone commands them to do things. But do not lose 1 minute of sleep in your life about what AI agents are going to do to your job in the next 2 to 3 years. So much in life you can't predict, like everything that's going on right now as I record this, like tariffs in the United States, crazy things with visas, students being ejected from the country with like no advance notice. There's so much out there that can impact your career that you never would have seen coming. The AI agents part I really wouldn't worry about. Next up, Sean says, hi, Brent. Sometimes people are overconfident because they don't know what they don't know. What do you not know about SQL Server that you wish you knew more about? One of the things that's tough is there's only so many hours in the day, and I want to know everything. Like maybe a decade ago, yeah, it's probably about a little shorter than maybe like 8, 9 years ago, I made the decision to let go of availability groups. I think SQL Server availability groups are amazing. They're fantastic. They're so powerful, but also at the same time, they had gotten so complex that it was really hard for one person to know everything that they would want to know just about availability groups, let alone things like the query processor or index tuning or memory tuning or anything like that. So I had to make tough decisions, and I said, I'm going to give up availability groups, which also meant that I was not going to learn PowerShell. I wasn't going to learn how to do cluster troubleshooting or read the error logs with PowerShell. If I could pick one thing that I wish I could do, that I wish that I could know better, it would either be SQL Server availability groups, because I think they're really cool, or I wish that I could read C. I'm not saying that I wish I could program in C. I wish that I knew more about reading C so that I could do a better job of reading the source code for databases, for open source databases, for example. I would love to explore that in more depth. But at the end of the day, it's 1:38 p.m. and I have a highball in my hand. And when I say things like the end of the day, you should be careful about who you take advice from there. At the end of the day, there's other stuff that I want to do. Although in my defense, it's a Saturday. It's not, I guess I'm technically working on a Saturday. But there's other stuff that I want to do in life, so I make that decision to draw the line somewhere, and then at the end of that time, I just go, okay, I can't learn any more about that stuff. But either AGs or reading C would be the big ones. I have a pile-up stack of books that I want to learn or want to read. There's a great book on my bookshelf about what happens to China as their economy and government changes. That's the next thing that I want to learn just personally. It was a brilliant book. I wish I could remember the author's name. I'll put it on a future webcast. Kulstad says, what is your stance on multiple installs of SQL Server to keep important business processes running versus one SQL Server to manage them all? So I don't agree that that's a good question, because you're implying that multiple instances is by default better for some reason, like it's going to be more reliable. And in my experience, the more stuff that you give someone to manage, the crappier job they will do of it. If I got a choice between one well-maintained SQL Server where people are really on top of backup jobs, of corruption checking, of all the agent jobs that run on it, locking security down appropriately, versus a dozen SQL servers that people are doing a kind of half-assed job of managing, give me one every time. There's a saying that your father said very often when you were growing up, keep it simple, stupid. And he wasn't saying that because you're dumb. That's just a total coincidence. It also happens that he says that to everyone, even the smart people, and I live by that rule myself as well. That's why I have 2 ingredient drinks for most of the time. Ynze asks, after I restart my SQL Server, the write latency on the main database rises slowly from 0 to 160 over the course of 3 days. You got to give me a unit of measure. I don't even know what that means. Is that bobcats? Is that lounge chairs? 160 what? Feet per second? What on earth is that? This is, I've tried increasing IOPS, but that does not seem to help. Query optim, where can I look further? It is time for you to attend my Mastering Server Tuning class, Mastering Server Tuning. If you find yourself struggling with tuning SQL Server, then it's time for you to attend the Mastering Server Tuning class. Because if you send me stuff where I can't even tell what the unit of measure is, the very first module that we start with in the Mastering Server Tuning class is how to measure your SQL Server. That's where you want to start. Starr says, your post today was amazing. You continue to be my hero in so many ways. I bet that that refers to my post a couple of weeks ago where I gently kind of reminded readers that I'm pansexual, just so that I don't usually put a whole lot of stuff out about that on my profile. Like once every 3 years, I pop my head up and say, hey, just as a reminder, if you think LGBTQ people are the enemy, you know an LGBTQ person, and I don't think that you think that I'm the enemy. Maybe you do if I've reamed you out in the past on one of our office hours for questions. But it helps for people to put a face on the enemy, you know, and go, we're not all here trying to give you some kind of propaganda. And I say we're not all here. There are bad people of every gender and sexuality preference and racial background and ethnicity and religion and all that. There are bad people across the board. There are also good people across the board. So just try not to take someone's sexual orientation and go, well, I can't trust them. I used a redneck accent there. I don't know why I did that, because that comes from all backgrounds. Next up, Juche says, what's the worst database security incident in your opinion? I don't know that I've ever ranked them. The ones that bother me the most are the ones that come from the government. When a government agency loses data or exposes data, that really pisses me off, because I think if there's one organization that should be a shining star for security, in a theoretical perfect world, it should be the government. The government is not known for inexpensive things. The government is not known for doing things halfway. If you've ever involved in government contracting, I'm not saying that they're known for being good either, but I would hope that they would be so rigidly process-oriented that they would get things right, and it frustrates me because that is not how things work. I don't want to say that I understand when for-profit companies do it, because they should be good stewards of data as well. But I understand why for-profit companies often cut security corners or can't afford to do things the right way. But when it comes to the government, I'm like, really? 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 Next up, Bandhu says, what are your thoughts on using file groups to periodically migrate older data from expensive storage to cheaper storage for cost-saving purposes? No. So that as soon as you say file groups, what I think you're trying to do is you're trying to rebuild indexes or move objects from one file group to another. Don't do that. It's a logged operation. It's slow. It's going to take a long time. It's going to be I/O intensive. Instead, when you decide that you want to migrate between types of storage, what you do is set up a new log shipping replica or a new availability groups replica with the storage design that you want. Migrate over to that, because you can do that live in real time. You can set up log shipping, availability groups, keep the data in sync. And then whenever it's time to cut over, you can have a nice short minimal outage of like 30 seconds when you go do that failover. And you can do that for version upgrades. You can do it for patches, all kinds of stuff like that. As opposed to any time you do what's called a size of data operation. You're going to learn a new term today. A size of data operation is something that the larger that the data is, the longer the operation takes. You don't want to do size of data operations. They're like the last resort when you're managing data, and that's what moving stuff between file groups is, a size of data operation. Next up, now Bandhu also has another question. The developers want the DBA, hold on a second, it's not updating on my screen. There it goes. Bandhu says, the developers want the DBA team to periodically review the T-SQL generated by their ORM. Why? Why? So what do the developers expect to happen? Are the DBAs going to complain about the T-SQL generated by the ORM? Probably. DBAs complain about everything. They're angry, isolated individuals who want to take a knife to your ORM. Not me personally, I like ORMs. What do you expect to happen to the developers who want this? Your DBAs are not going to like the SQL that comes out of the ORM. So then what are you going to do about that? Are you prepared to get rid of the ORM? If that answer is no, don't bother looking at the T-SQL output. Nobody's going to be happy enough with it. It'll never be good enough. So, next up, Philippe says, what in your opinion should be a typical SQL Server DBA calendar? What should be regular scheduled tasks? At what interview? Or what interval? So the reality is that DBA means drastically different things at different companies. And I'm going to give you a couple of really simple examples. I've got one client, I can think of the DBA clearly in my head right now. In that company, there are only 2 people in IT. There's a Windows administrator and there's the DBA. This company doesn't have any developers. All they host is third-party applications, but it's essential that those third-party applications run well. So that DBA is responsible for doing backups, patching, looking at the hypervisor, buying hardware, scheduling upgrades. They have a very like a refrigerator technician kind of job where they're not doing any cooking, they're just making sure that the refrigerator works. I got another company, and I'm thinking of this company very clearly. They have a team of 4 DBAs who are responsible for a 24/7 application. Every time that code gets deployed to production, at least one of these people will review every line of T-SQL queries that's going in. All the T-SQL code all comes through stored procedures. It does not ever come through an ORM. So the work that that team does is very different. Out of those 4 DBAs, in any given week, they rotate between tasks. One week you might be on backups, corruption checking, agent jobs, overall upgrades, plumbing. The next week you might be on call for performance issues. The next week you might be part of the code review team, and they cycle through those all month long. So there is no one DBA job. So unfortunately, that's why even when you find, there was an author, Brad McGehee, who used to write a lot of stuff for Simple Talk, and he had a Brad's DBA checklist. And if you read through that, I was like, dude, I know Brad, I love Brad. Brad's really smart, and he's a great person. I was like, Brad, there's no way one person can get through this checklist every week and every month. It's not going to happen. It's just because even if you get one support call, you're screwed. So that's why you won't find one universal checklist that works well for everyone. Next up, let's see here. Let me refresh the page because my phone went to sleep there. Next up, we have Lost-In-The-Mountains. Lost-In-The-Mountains says, I inherited Merge Replication. The setup involves a main lodge and 10 backcountry remote lodges. Oh, I love this kind of thing. It says the main lodge publishes to the remote lodges and the merge runs every 4 hours. The network's okay and Starlink is our backup. What would you consider implementing as an alternative to replication? So first off, if something's working, leave it be. If something's working for the business, leave it be. Because best case scenario, you replace it with something else, but worst case scenario, even if what you think is doing is working, or what you put in is working correctly, people will find ways to blame your new system for anything that goes wrong. Well, my eggs weren't cooked correctly this morning. I think it has to do with that new thing that the DBA put in. You know, stuff like that happens all the time, all the time. If people aren't happy with it, if it's not working for them, which it didn't sound like you were expressing any problems in the question, then the next thing would be why? Why isn't it working for you? What problem are you having that you need to have solved in the new environment? For example, you might say that, well, sometimes the lodge goes down and gets severed altogether. Starlink doesn't work, the network doesn't work, and that place needs to continue to process and get further and further behind for the course of days and then be able to resync in again and not have any conflicts. You know, that could be one thing that you would say. Another thing you might say is, well, we're having problems with the main lodge, their internet not being able to keep up with the database changes, at which point the answer might be moving to the cloud or to a colo facility for that main lodge. All comes down to that line you hear me say all the time, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? And then go from there. And then let's see here, we'll do one more question. Hypervisor asks, if I have almost no page I/O latch weights, is there any real reason to add more RAM? Yes, absolutely. There can be many. I'll give you one example, queries needing large memory grants. If you have queries that need large memory grants in order to, say, process a clustered column store index, for example, or just do sorts in memory if you're not allowed to add indexes on the table, you can absolutely see memory issues due to query workspace grants while still not seeing any page I/O latch weights whatsoever. To learn more about that stuff, go check out my Mastering Server Tuning class. Second time I've recommended that one in this episode, but that'll give you how you go about measuring your server, finding what the main bottleneck is, and then deciding what actions to take based on those bottlenecks. I did not do a good enough job of putting a dent in my highball here. And it's absolutely delicious. I didn't get into highballs until we went to Japan. Eve took me to Japan and China. We went somewhere else on that trip. And Japan, some of the high-end restaurants just only had whiskey. That was all they had. And they were like, either you can drink straight whiskey or you can have a highball. And I was like, well, I need to be able to walk afterwards, and I like to drink a lot just in terms of staying hydrated. So how about water and a highball, whatever a highball is? And it's whiskey and club soda or ginger ale, depending on how the bartender makes it. And it's quite good. I'm not really usually a whiskey guy, bourbon sometimes, but whiskey tends to be a little bit much for me. But a highball, I'm like, oh man, these are fantastic. I could drink these all day. And the drink isn't pink. This is a pink glass from our poolside collection, because after this I'm going out to the pool. It's a beautiful day here in Las Vegas. It is currently, to get an idea, 73 degrees Fahrenheit, and I have several hours before sundown, so I intend to go out there and enjoy myself. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Hopefully y'all had fun and learned something, and I will see y'all on the next office hours. Adios.